So this is not your father's software market, just as this was not your father's Oldsmobile. So this is not your father, it's Tommy Lee Jones, and this is you on the right-hand side. That could just as well, of course, be a young lady as a young guy. It's just that this is where we found a graphic from. This is actually a graphic out of the book. The folks who put the book together did a fabulous job with the graphics. So, it's not your father's software market for the following reasons. So historically, let's go back a few years, our options were to buy poorly written software from one vendor or another. And that group of vendors generally were insurance people who got into software. So guess what they did? They wrote really crummy software because they weren't software professionals. But they knew what they had to do because they knew insurance. There were fewer good vendor choices 10 years ago than there are now. Not much more than 10 years ago, we still had the Y2K hangover. I mean, this sucked all of the life, the oxygen, and the money out of a lot of IT departments, probably into the sort of mid 2003s, 4s, and 5s. We had high perceived risk. For those of you that can sort of harken back to that point in time, there were a precursor group of vendors who sort of declared the promise of highly configurable software but couldn't deliver the reality of it. Tenfold and Casetech are poster children for this. Came out of nowhere, they were brash, they signed up tons and tons of companies which proved there was a market, and then they promptly crashed and burned, they got sued, and they basically disappeared. I mean, they just came and went inside of a few years. So that was another thing that really sort of we got our fingers burned as an industry, and so it wasn't safe to get in the water. In those days, competition was less technology based. So one of the statements I made earlier on is, it's one of our core beliefs that there's no insurance innovation anymore without IT. There's nothing we can do. The volumes of data are too big. Everything requires technology. Our customers demand technology. So in those days, you could still get away with good customer service on a telephone. Now that is nothing like enough. Insurance management 10 years ago tended to be inward looking. We had relatively low consumer expectations. And there was a relatively high perceived frequency of failure when it came to doing these projects. That's the tenfold and the Casetech reference. Okay? Fast forward just a few years and look on the right-hand side and consider these current enablers. We have superior software now, and we genuinely do. By and large, one of the descriptors we use when we talk about the market is that the newer vendors, in general, are software people who've gotten into insurance rather than insurance people who got into software. So the software is better because professional software developers are now developing the code. There are more good vendor choices than there have ever been. We've seen the rise and basic domination of the internet, which drives so much of what's expected of these systems and expected of us by way of delivery of service. There's lower perceived risk. These projects seem to go better more often than they used to. And the horror stories we used to hear, which ended up with the vendors in court and all that, seem to be significantly fewer than they were before. Insurance competition is now technology-based. That's where we started this conversation with the Accenture thing. That's simply the next step along the way here. And we've had an influx of management into insurance at the CEO, the C-level, of people who came from outside of insurance. We were very much an inward-looking industry for, I don't know, however long we've been around, 200 years, whatever. Over the last 10 years in particular, insurance companies have started to hire people in from banks and other financial type services where the level of automation is significantly higher. The degree of complexity is significantly lower, but nonetheless, these folks show up and they say, what do you mean I can't do this? What do you mean our software doesn't do that? And so we've suddenly had this injection of momentum and demand, not only from the exterior because of the internet, but from the interior because of the promotion of these people into C-level jobs in our industry. And we have high and growing and never-ending consumer expectations. And we think a greater frequency of success. So that's why the market, that's sort of like some factors, if you will, that have enabled what we saw on those diagrams. So we've sort of covered this legacy versus modern, a little bit of historical perspective. So what we're witnessing then is the rise and maturation of the highly configurable vendors. And so what does this mean? Why would a CIO care? The CIO would care because you have more and better choices. There are more vendors that are good. The software is better, it's more configurable, it's easier to use, it's faster to change, which means you're better on your feet, quicker. You've got better acquisition options. Here's another thing. I remember back to when I was a CIO and buying software, and basically the vendors dictated the terms, and the terms weren't friendly, and neither were the vendors. And it was absolutely buyer beware. This term we now use in our marketplace about partnerships, these modern vendors mean it. They really do want to be your partner, which means they want to treat you well, they want you to succeed, and they want you to be their customer for the next 30 or 40 years. And that's a change. And so your acquisition options, number one, are safer. Number two, they're more varied. You can buy a license. You can run the software in an ASP environment. The cloud is becoming a reality for us. There's different payment options that you can get now. You can pay as you go more. It used to be that you signed an initial license agreement, you paid a ton of money up front, and you were up to your armpits in financial commitment to a vendor before you even knew if the vendor could do anything for you or not. And if you found out that the vendor wasn't the right vendor, getting out was bloody and awful because it was millions of dollars and all kinds of other things. We don't have to do that anymore. The vendors are friendlier and they're more flexible. There are more implementation options. Another feature of these newer vendors, not only is the software better, not only are they friendlier and easier to do business with, they generally have embraced some form of agile methodology. And all other things being equal, agile is better than waterfall. That's not a subject we're going to talk about. We can talk about it at a roundtable this afternoon if you'd like to. I'm just going to make that as a statement of fact.